we were in Afghanistan during the elections in, I think it was early 2011, might have been late 2010. I can't remember what month it was now, but we were at the Governor District Center up in Marja. I remember that morning I was getting my guys like all laid into positions, and I was like, look, keep your heads down, right? Dude's like shooting our guys in the head a lot. So I'm like, keep your heads down. If anything pops off, then you come up, because they're not going to know you're up here. They're probably observing anyway, but whatever. And I'm talking to my staff sergeant. So I was a first sergeant at the time. And I'm like, I just know stuff's going to pop off. And all of a sudden I hear this round crack, and it comes right by my head, right here, right between, like he's standing here and I'm standing here. And that round went like right there. And I was like, ooh, that was a close one. And the staff sergeant, I don't want to mention his name, but he's looking at me and his eyes are like this big, and he's like,
a rifle round passed between your heads.
Between our heads. Yeah. It was, I think it probably was about that close to my ear. Right?
Like a few inches.
A few inches away from my face. And needless to say, the sniper, he didn't make it. But that round came by, and as soon as that happened, we got RPG fire from another direction, and then all Hades broke loose. I mean, like, and it was like, I don't remember how many hours it was now, probably 12, 13 hours of just constant conflict the whole rest of that day.
Welcome to Hey Chaplain. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. This is part 2 of our interview with Dennis Kleyh Jr. Part 1 was about teaching defensive tactics and the differences in mindsets between veterans and police recruits who have never been punched in the face. If you haven't listened to that, please go back and catch part 1. It was a really good episode. But in putting that episode together, I was left with an equal portion of the interview where Dennis talked to me about his careers in the Marine Corps and law enforcement. One quick correction. After I finished the first episode, I discovered that I made a mistake. Dennis was saying Fourth Recon Battalion, and I said Force Recon, and over the internet, neither of us heard the difference. But I should have double-checked, especially since it's as clear as a bell now that I listen back to it. Sorry about that. But what to do with that extra career-related material and the Afghanistan war story that you just heard in the cold open? Well, as random as a near miss from a sniper can seem, military careers and law enforcement careers can seem pretty random too. It seems like it's only the recruiters who have a clear idea of what your future will be like. Your actual mileage may vary. But right here is some interesting wisdom. For good or ill, you don't know exactly where your military or police service may take you. So let's use Dennis's story to look at that. The police careers, the Corps, and all the random turns. This is going to be part 2 of our conversation with Marine Corps Sergeant Major and Police Captain Dennis Kleyh Jr. So what MOS, what kind of jobs did you have?
So I started as my actual contract initially was as an 0311 rifleman. When I got to infantry school, they were like, yeah, you're not going to be a rifleman. You're going to be an 0351. And I was like, well, what is that? And they were like, that's an assault man. And I was like, cool. What is that? And after they explained it to me, not that I had a choice, I went through that training, left there. Right before leaving there, I got selected to go to security forces again.
Oh, you didn't say what it was. What's an assault man?
Assault man. So it's basically like it's an MOS that no longer exists, right? But we were like a foot mobile anti-tank trained guy. So we would fire this thing called an M47 Dragon, which for people who may or may not know what that is, it is the slowest moving piece of equipment I've ever seen in my life to fire at it.
It's a Cold War era anti-tank rocket.
Yeah, it's an anti-tank rocket that basically goes right? And then about 11 seconds later, hopefully you hit the tank.
Yes.
But the other really cool part about that job was all of the explosives and demolition stuff that I got to learn. So that was kind of my foray into learning about composition B and C4 and detonation cord and RDX and all that fun stuff. So I was kind of a troubled child in the Marine Corps. So I ended up getting NJP for being UA on a weekend Liberty.
That's basically the same thing as AWOL, AWOL, but for the Navy and Marine Corps.
And so I was like, oh man, my career is over. And right before I graduated, one of the admin guys called me in his office and he was like, hey, you want to go to security forces? And I was like, what is that? And he explained it, he was like, well, back then they had sea duty or they had barracks duty. And that was kind of, I was like, yeah, I mean, going out on a ship sounds good. I'm 18, I'm young and silly. Yeah, send me. So I ended up shipping off to security forces school. And while I was there, they actually said, hey, there's this unit called Fast Company. And I was like, what the heck is Fast Company? And he said, well, it's basically a fleet anti-terrorism security team. And I was like, that sounds kind of cool. What do you got to do that? Well, they do this screening and they do this, you go out and you got to run around and go on a long hike on the beach and all this stuff. And they were kind of trying to tailor themselves after the reconnaissance model a little bit.
Okay.
So there were 150 of us that attended security forces school. And of that, 3 of us got selected to go to fleet anti-terrorism. So off I went to do that. I did that for, two and a half years, I think. And it was normally supposed to be like a 1-year deal. And then you got sent back to the Fleet Marine Force. Well, in that first year, I ended up in Panama. So that was 1989 with the whole Noriega fiasco. And then in 1990, we were like, no way they're sending us to Saudi Arabia, right? But we ended up getting sent over to Desert Shield and then stayed subsequently through Desert Storm. And then when I came back from that, I think I did one more like Fast Company mission down in South Carolina. And I came back from that and they were like, guess what? You're now going to Quantico, Virginia. And I was like, what? That's like officer land. And they were like, yeah, that's where you're going. So I went out there, thought I was going to end up in their Staff NCO Academy, like helping, be a little scribe or something because I was only a corporal. And I got there and they were like, hey, you want to be a chaser? And I was like, again, what is that? And they're like, well, these guys that all go UA from the Marine Corps and stuff, they have a unit at Security Battalion that goes out, collects those guys up and then takes them around until their, final discharge is adjudicated, whether that be court martial, brig time, whatever. So we had this thing called a casual platoon and there were like 4 of us. There was a staff sergeant and there were 3 of us that were like the go do stuffers, right? So we basically took care of all of we call them casuals, all of the guys that had been brought back, and they would go out and like, they would mow our grass, right? They would be put on like working parties, like incessantly. And we also took care of like all the barracks stuff for that security battalion. So we did the room inspections. We did all the maintenance stuff. We did all that. So I did that for about a year. And then right at the end of that, I was going to re-enlist and they were like, yeah, so your MOS isn't available anymore. It was during like the drawdown in the early 90s. They were like, so you're going to have to either change MOS and re-enlist or get out. And I was like, okay. So I put in for a package to go to Cannon Cocker School, right, for artillery. And I had just had my oldest daughter at the time. And they were like, yeah, we need you in Fort Sill next week. And I was like, I'm not going to Fort Sill next week. If you can give me like next month, sure. But my wife literally was still in the hospital. They were like, no, we're not doing that. You either do this or get out. And I was like, okay, I'll go talk to the reserve guys. So I did that. So I got out, joined the Marine Corps Reserve, and I was doing that for about 4 months as a UAV operator in an intel platoon. And I ended up being the headquarters platoon sergeant. And this opportunity to go out on recruiting duty took place. So I was like, cool. So I went and did recruiting for 3 years. And then I left that, went back to a regimental tow platoon, which was like The toe is a tube launched, optically tracked, wire guided missile, right? The fast,
much better,
much quicker. And I got to run around with the Mark 19 on top of my vehicle. So that was cool. So I did that for about, I don't know, a year or two. And then they said, hey, we need a headquarters company gunny. And I was a staff sergeant at the time. And I was like, yeah, roger that. Sign me up. So I did that for another probably year or two. And then the one of my COs with TOW platoon went up to Iowa to a unit called Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 24th Marine Regiment. And I was like, yeah, I'm going up there. So he was like, hey, you're going to be a platoon commander. I was like, well, sir, I'm not an officer. Right. And he's like, I don't care. You're going to be my, right. So he says, you're going to be my first platoon commander, staff sergeant. And I was like, well, that's odd. You know, I figured maybe 3rd platoon or weapons or something, but no. You're going to be my first platoon commander. Okay. About a year after that. So we're probably 03, 04 time frame. Actually it was 04. I got an opportunity to sign up for UNITAS, which was, I don't remember the acronym now, but it was basically like a South American joint task force thing. You go down there and you float around on a boat in the, Southern hemisphere and visit different countries, Peru and Bolivia and all that stuff. And our unit got ordered to go to Iraq for OIF 2. Basically, I was like, well, you know what? I'm not going to UNITAS, right? I'm not going to leave my Marines behind and let them go to combat and me stay here.
Yeah.
So I told my CO, I'm not going to UNITAS. I'm staying with the unit. He was like, roger that. You're going to be my first platoon commander. And I was like, well, but sir, I'm not. I'm a staff sergeant, He's like, yeah, here, read this. So he handed me the TBS book, the basic school book that officers have to, go through. He was like, read this and learn it because I'm not getting an officer to replace you. And I was like, crap. So we deployed. I ended up being the first platoon commander. We got a big drop of officers right before we left doing our pre-deployment training. And I went back to my CO again and I said, sir, what's happening with me? And he said, you're my platoon commander. And I was like, crap. So off we went and we executed that deployment in a little place you may or may not have heard of called the Triangle of Death, south of Baghdad. So Mahmadiyah, Lutefiya, Yusufiyya, Al-Rashid. That was the area we operated in. Got selected to gunny while I was in country, to gunnery sergeant. Came back, and as soon as we got back to the States and I got off of post-deployment, I came back home, and a guy that was a I&I staff instructor for the unit I was in TOW platoon with called me, and he was at 1st Marine Division Schools. And he said, hey, Gunny, what do you think about coming back on active duty? I was like, yeah, sounds great, sir. What else am I going to do, right? So I was still on the reserve component, but I ended up going to what they called an IMADET, which is an individual mobilization augmentee detachment. And I went out to Camp Pendleton, and I was at division schools from the time I was a gunny until like my 2nd year as a first sergeant. And then the forces that be, as in all of the sergeants major and Marine Corps Forces Reserve, basically started calling me, and they were like, hey, you're the only first sergeant we have left that can deploy with this unit. Will you deploy? And I was like, I just put in a reaccession package to come, to actually transition back onto active duty and finish my career. And they were like, yeah, we don't care. So I called the monitor of the active duty monitor, and he was like, hey, look, if I was you, I would execute these orders. He goes, it makes no difference to me, but if you want to be a sergeant major, you probably should go. And I was like, okay. So I deployed with 3rd Battalion, 25th Marines, India Company, down to Southern Helmand Province in Afghanistan. So Marja, Sangin, and all that stuff. We had a couple guys we had to send over to Sangin, which didn't make me happy. But executed that deployment, came back, got off of my active orders in 2012, I think it was. Ended up joining Fourth Reconnaissance Battalion as a first sergeant with Echo Company, Fourth Recon, and then got selected as sergeant major. And at the wonderfully young age of 44 years old, went to jump school for the U.S. Army. And then they sent me down to be the battalion sergeant major for Fourth Reconnaissance Battalion, and that's where I ended up retiring.
So let me just, and this probably won't be in the actual final cut, but I'm just curious. So when you went to OIF 2, was that your second time in Iraq? Because
third. Oh, in Iraq, yeah, it was my second time.
Okay, well, that's because it kind of leads to the question of, during Operation Desert Storm, were you at sea or were you like in Kuwait?
No, we were actually, we deployed as a platoon, believe it or not.
Oh, really?
Yeah, as a platoon. So we were Fleet Anti-Terrorism 3rd Platoon. We actually deployed to Manama, Bahrain, and that was our jumping off point. So we ran missions kind of all over the peninsula over there, but that was our headquarters. We were actually stationed there with a unit called the Desert Ducks, which, it's a Navy helicopter unit.
Huh. Okay.
Which I had never heard of, but we were all on the same compound, and I remember like we could never get the sewage to stop breaking. So it was like we had this big wall around the compound, and every day you'd wake up and you were like, "Oh, yep, that's fresh." So it was awesome. It's awesome.
Now, even though the details were different, wasn't that basically like every military career you have ever heard? There are so many random coincidences. It's the people you know, and babies being born, deployments happening, discipline, and random assignments, where if you had just been 1 week earlier or 1 month later, your career would have gone a completely different route. I don't think that the chaos of military life is always a good thing, especially for your family. But I do like how it destroys the illusion that you have absolute control, because you don't. And yet we spend a tremendous amount of time worrying about things that we ultimately can't control. Just to reinforce that point, Dennis was talking about his civilian law enforcement career, primarily how the reserve component of his Marine Corps career, it kept interfering with the consistency you might have wanted. Let's hear him talk about that part of his career in his own words.
So while I was in the reserve component back in 1998, my father, so I gave you some background here. My father was a firefighter. And he was a great firefighter. So he was in the Marine Corps for 4 years. He got out, went to work for the railroad, like his father, his father retired from the railroad. He kept getting laid off all the time, right? And after like our second or third move to another place, so he wouldn't get laid off, he was like, I am done with this stuff. So he got on the fire department in Independence, Missouri. And he worked there until he retired from it as an assistant chief. Part of the reason I became a cop is, one, because it was kind of a natural transition, right? Like something with purpose. But also my dad had gone and gotten his certification when it was still, it only took you 120 hours to get certified, right? That's how far back he went. And so in 98, I got this bright idea, like, I want to be a cop. And so I went to the academy and I graduated, and I had no home, right? It was back when you had to pay for your own academy, and I wasn't sponsored anywhere. But I ended up getting on with a little agency over in the Columbia, Missouri area. I was with them for about, a year or so. Then I got on as a reserve with Boone County Sheriff's Office for a little while. And then I got out of copping for a minute. And then I came back over to this side of the state, was working for a staffing company as what was I doing? I can't even remember the job title now, but basically I had a contract with UPS. They measured the packages, and it was like a revenue recovery thing where they would measure it and make sure, hey, we got all our money. And I was like, you know what? This is terrible. Like I hate the corporate world. So I went and got back into law enforcement. And so I got on with Pleasant Hill, it was Garden City first, Garden City Police Department.
I'm going to interject here just to make another observation. I can so identify with not wanting anything to do with that corporate thing. Now, not all cops feel this way. In fact, some of the best salesmen I know are cops. Some of the best businessmen I know are cops. But for me, I could not just sell widgets or do revenue recovery. I just couldn't. I would have to feel that there was more meaningfulness to it. And Dennis said this earlier in that clip. He had to do something that had purpose. The cops who feel that kind of calling to do this, that kind of compulsion, I identify with that.
But the guy that I got on there with was a former Marine. Well, not a former Marine. He's a Marine, right?
There's no such thing.
Right. But he'd gotten out. He was actually in one of the units I was in at one point before me. And then he got out and went and became an Army officer in their PSYOPs program. He called me one day and he was like, "Hey, brother, your dad tells me," my dad and him knew each other from some, I don't know, committee or something. He was like, "I heard you're certified to be a police officer." And I was like, "Why, yes, I am." And he was like, "Why don't you come on down and talk to me?" And I was like, "Okay." So from 2012 until 2019, off and on, full-time, part-time, and reserve, I was affiliated with Garden City. And in 2019, they shuttered the police department. But I had managed to get myself on with Pleasant Hill full-time. So I came up here, worked here for about 2.5 years. I left here and went to Cass County. I was still doing the Marine Corps Reserve thing. And as you can imagine, being with the reconnaissance unit, it was a little more than 1 week in a month, 2 weeks in the summer.
Yeah.
In fact, the last year I was with that unit, I think I had 133 days of duty with the unit, right? So I left Cass County because I was like, look, this is killing everybody else on the shift. It's not fair to those guys. So I left Cass County. I went out, did the business thing and all that stuff, retired from the Marine Corps. I was actually working that business for 3.5 years, I guess, doing powder coating and Cerakoting. And I got a random phone call from a guy I used to work with who is now the captain at Pleasant Hill. And he was like, "Hey, brother, why don't you come back and work for us?" And I said, "Sure." After about the 5th time, I said, "Sure." And I came back to work as an officer, went through a sergeant promotional process. And my chief called me in the office at the end of it. And he sat me down and he said, "Look, I hate to tell you this, but I'm not promoting you to sergeant." I was like, "Hey, okay, whatever. No sweat off my back. I got the business going. I still had time to do that, And he goes, "Yeah, you're going to be my captain." And I was like, "Well, I guess I'm shutting the business down then." So, that's kind of how that all played out.
So just like his military career, Dennis's police career has all kinds of fascinating twists and turns where, by being in the right place at the right time, Dennis was on the receiving end of opportunities that no one, including him, could have predicted. I think this is what I want to get across in listening to Dennis recount his career, is that you cannot know what's going to happen next. You certainly can't control it. And I speak to so many officers who are so negative. They have been beaten down and filled with cynicism, and they are convinced that no opportunity will ever come their way. The only thing they can do is get out. Well, maybe it is time to get out. But it also could be that if you waited just a little longer, if you stuck with it, you wouldn't be able to predict what opportunities could come your way next. So keep doing good work. Keep going to schools and taking classes and diversifying your experience in law enforcement. Don't let cynicism take over. Instead, always be ready for that phone call that taps you on the shoulder and says, "Hey, here's a change of scenery that you never could have expected." On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
And so, like I said, that feeling went away until I noticed every Christmas I worked, every 4th of July I worked, every Thanksgiving I worked, because the senior guys would get to pick and choose. And as a lower guy on the totem pole, you kind of just had to pick up all the slack. And then I came home from work one day and my daughters, I have twin daughters at the time who were only like 2, were walking. And I was like, man, I'm missing everything in life.
The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, and as always, let's pray for peace in our city.
This is the Chaplain's Daughter. Thank you for listening to the Hey Chaplain podcast. Your support of the show means so much to our family. Thank you for leaving a 5-star rating and a written review. It really helps us out.